Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Katie Somerville and I'm one of the fashion curators here at the NGV. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the unceded lands of the Kulin people of Naarm, which we now know as Melbourne. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to them and their elders. If you're joining us remotely today, I would also like to acknowledge that many other people present in today's talk may be on the lands of other traditional custodians, and pay my respects to those communities wherever they are as well. So today I'm going to talk to you about one aspect of the work of Gabrielle Chanel, the exhibition which some of you may have already seen and some of you hopefully are about to see, actually spans the entire career of Gabrielle Coco Chanel, from the First World War period right through to her death at the age of 87 in 1971. One of the very lasting and iconic aspects of her work is in fact the suit for women, and there are some very beautiful early examples of that idea right in the very first rooms of the exhibitions from the 20s and 30s. But the thing I think I'll talk to you specifically today about is that second phase of when Gabrielle Chanel presented her suits to the world. And this was after a period of closure. She closed the couture house that she'd established just before the 1920s. She closed it in 1939 during the war, and decided at the age of 70 in 1953 to reopen her couture house in Paris. And the item in particular that was the sort of driving force behind those initial first few collections was her representation of the suit. And a suit for women, we must remember, is something that, particularly when she first introduced it in earlier in the 20th century, was quite a radical thing to do. Suits were traditionally very much associated with menswear and business attire and a much more formal style of clothing. And one of the things that Gabrielle Chanel did so well, in fact, was balance this aspect of the masculine with the feminine in her designs across the board, but in particular with the suit. So I thought I'd prepare you for that section of the exhibition. We've in fact dedicated an entire room to the Chanel suit, 35 examples in all, and they're predominantly from the period of the 50s and 60s. There is also one very subtle, elegant example that was not only designed by Gabrielle Chanel, but from her own wardrobe, a suit that she wore for herself. So make sure you seek that one out. But let's do a bit of an anatomy of the suit, the Chanel suit. Basically, a Chanel suit typically would be constituted of three items. So a jacket, a blouse underneath that, and then a skirt. Occasionally trousers, but predominantly the Chanel suit that has become iconic features a skirt. The other thing that's quite particular about a Chanel suit is the fabric that's used. One of the things that Chanel introduced very early on, again, sort of quite a radical departure for luxury women's wear, was the introduction of the material tweed, which was, again, traditionally very much considered a masculine material associated with sportswear and menswear and men's tailoring. But it's become, of course, an integral part of the typical Chanel suit. The tweeds used in her exquisite examples, however, often are very fine silk or very fine wool, sometimes sort of tufted wools like a boucle wool, as well as the tweeds. The other thing that you'll notice when you do see that group of suits is a very particular colour palette. One of the things that Chanel was known for was a very restricted sort of series of colours that she preferred to work with. So black, navy, cream, with the occasional startling and joyful use of fiery red or hot pink. One particular suit that I'd encourage you to seek out when you do go and look at that room of suits is one from the NGV's own collection. It's a very beautiful example from the early 60s. And it's creating the illusion of tweed. So she's taking that idea of the tweed one step further. The base fabric's actually a very textured, beautiful cream wool. And it looks at first glance like another tweed, like the others. But in fact, what she's done is something even more decadent and luxurious, and created that look of the tweed by hand painting a series of stripes in red, pink and sort of raspberry colour to emulate the pattern that you expect in a tweed. So some of them may look like a tweed, but always look closely and look for those other details. So each of those items, I've described the jacket, and the jacket, importantly, typically was collarless. You know, when you think mostly of a suit, it at very least has a collar and usually a quite dominant lapel. But the thing with the origin of the suit from Chanel's point of view was it was a much more relaxed item. It really had much more in common when you think about it with a men's cardigan, for instance. So a sort of a soft round neckline, and then instead of the typical suit, which is usually has layers of interfacing to stiffen it through the body and many seams and darts to reinforce the structure of the suit, her suits are actually very fluid and soft and quite light and airy. And one of the reasons for that is the way it's cut and the way it's put together. So there'll be the main fabric of the body of the suit, and that's usually in the front, constructed of about 4 panels, 2 main panels, and then 2 very clever panels flat down the side of the suit. So another thing to look for as you're working through this room. And that, again, is to create a very beautiful, elegant fit that just sort of glides down the side of the body rather than restricting it and holding it close. Through the back, there's usually a centre seam, and then across the whole surface, holding a very soft lining to the inside of the jacket. Instead of the lining being free-floating, it's held in place by rows, usually exactly 4 centimetres apart, rows of regular stitches, almost like a quilted surface, if you think of it like that. And then at the base of the inside of the lining, something that you probably won't see looking at the garments, but you see the result of it, is a line of metallic chain that is stitched along the inside hemline at the base of the jacket. And this is to create the beautiful fall of the jacket, to stop it from riding up and to allow it to swing and move very easily against the body. The skirt, which is typically worn as part of the suit, was almost never above the knee. Gabrielle Chanel really wasn't a big fan of the mini skirt, it's safe to say, so she preferred that very elegant and flattering point just below the knee line to finish her skirts. They also had generally a little bit of a kick or a flare in them, so they sort of floated a little bit off the body. And importantly too, because so much about what Gabrielle introduced to women's wear, and we have still to thank her for today, was about practicality, ease of wearing and comfort. As you will note as you go through the exhibition, we feature many portraits of Chanel throughout the entire chronology of the exhibition. And the thing that's consistent throughout is that she wore her own clothes. In fact, she believed unless it was something that she wore, she wouldn't design it. So she was almost her own laboratory for creating these styles. So one of the things she did with the suit is rather than having it fixed with a waistband at the waist, it was sat slightly lower, just at the top of the hip line. So a bit more slouchy, much more comfortable to wear, and much more freeing of the body. And then, of course, a blouse underneath, often in a matching fabric that sort of replicated the lining of the jacket. And then pockets. She was a great believer in, again, as I say, sort of practical elements. So often 2 or 4 pockets, functioning pockets, not the type that are stitched closed, frustratingly. And then the incredible iconic buttons that we also come to recognise, often laden with very important symbols that were favoured by Chanel. The interlocking C for her name, the lion's head. She was a Leo, and lion's head was one of the motifs that recurred often in her designs. So you've got the fabric, the cut, the piecing all together. And this is the quintessential suit. And the other thing to think about is, I guess, the fact that fashion is something that often favours the young and is designed often for younger audiences. And in fact, when she did introduce her suit, it was in fact many of the young starlets of the era, such as Brigitte Bardot and other famed actresses and performers of the time, who took up this suit. but also it was older women. And in fact, Chanel was 70 when she reopened her house in 1953, and she continued to wear these suits herself throughout her career, as did many other women. So it's a very good example of a garment that's created in a way that is to be appealing and easy to wear and entirely appropriate for a woman of any age. So many things, I think, to reflect on when you enter this room and view, which at first looks like a group of very similar suits. It's all about the detail. So I hope you've enjoyed that little introduction to the suit, and encourage you to go and have another look more closely at the group we have on display. Thank you.